Frankenstein is a narrative that's been adapted many times since its original publication in 1818. More often than not, the adaptations have been unfaithful to the source material, much to my own disappointment. In today's video, however, I will be discussing Frankenstein in light of Guillermo del Toro's recent Netflix adaptation of Frankenstein. My qualifications, you may ask. I'm an English major who has studied Frankenstein for classes. I own 5 copies of Frankenstein, which are right here. And I've read Frankenstein in full twice. And it's, if you couldn't tell, my favorite book. Anyways, I'm fully aware that Del Toro has a pretty large and loyal following, so I'm slightly frightened that they're gonna be in my comments hating on me. That being said, I unfortunately was not a huge fan of Del Toro's adaptation of Frankenstein. I really tried to go in with an open mind and to not be too, I don't know, pretentious or like care too much about the differences in the novel, but I found that it was kind of, there was too many and it was too jarring. So I really couldn't put it aside, and I'm an English major. What am I supposed to do? You can't take me away from the book. I did hear that it was supposed to be a pretty faithful adaptation of Frankenstein going into it, so I had pretty high expectations, and it probably is like the most faithful adaptation to Frankenstein, but there just were a lot of changes in it that I feel like made it lose the nuance of the original text, and it kind of just lost touch with the original text in a lot of ways, and in a lot of specific ways that were important to me. So I wanted to talk about them a little bit in this video. The first thing I wanted to talk about is more cosmetic aspects of Frankenstein. Something I'm calling the Netflix-ification of Frankenstein is what I think was sort of a downfall for the film, unfortunately. Frankenstein definitely deserved to be in theaters and on a big screen for the public to view in that way. But that aside, I think Frankenstein, which is a gothic, moody, classic work of literature, deserved to be shot in a way that was true to that aspect of the novel. So something maybe shot on film, or just something that really captured that aspect of it, which I found it wasn't captured in the cinematography or the style of the movie at all. I really loved Robert Edgers's Nosferatu, which came out last year. I loved it. It was amazing. I've seen it twice now and I'm a huge fan. So I think I was expecting something along those lines, which is definitely like, that's my own fault. I had that expectation set, but it's a different director, so I can't expect them to be the same. That being said, I also haven't seen any of Del Toro's work before watching Frankenstein, so I didn't really have much of an expectation of what his style was or what to expect. So that is definitely on me, and that's probably just personal taste. Perhaps I don't like Del Toro's style, and that's okay. I'm sure some people will be upset about that, but that's okay. I don't need to like everything. That all being said, it could be Del Toro's style for sure, but I do think there is some merit to it being a part of Netflix's production of things, kind of. I find I don't really like some of Netflix's production and cinematography and just the way they go about things sometimes. I feel like it's almost overproduced and too, I want to say high quality, but I don't know if that's the right, what I'm trying to convey in that. I feel like the Netflix vibes of the film kind of ruined it for me a little bit. As I said, I frequently have a distaste for Netflix's style of production. I also felt like the film relied a lot on CGI, and that really was taking me out. Whenever a movie relies on CGI too much, that's very distracting for me. So I wasn't a fan of that. An example of some works that I didn't like because of like the production and cinematography from Netflix was Wednesday and Riverdale. Just like something about the way they're filmed for me is like the same in my mind, and I don't like it. So that's kind of the vibe I was getting from Netflix's Frankenstein, unfortunately. Another thing that I found slightly off-putting about the movie, and this is kind of just like a general statement a little bit, but it felt like it was made by a man. And it was, and that's totally fair. Del Toro is a man. That is a true statement, I guess. Obviously, men are allowed to write and create things for sure, and I'm not hating on it because it feels like it was written by a man. But I think just given the fact that the original text was written by a young woman in the 19th century, and also given that Mary Shelley is the daughter of the iconic feminist Mary Wollstonecraft, I think it was just disappointing for it to feel like that element of the text was lost, because the original text does feel like it was written by a woman, if that makes sense. Okay, let's get into some more of the substance of the film now, leaving behind some of the cosmetic things. A big critique that I found, and something that was like very prevalent throughout the film, was that it felt very on the nose and very obvious in a lot of ways. And for me, that's off-putting. I don't like when media is too obvious with what they're trying to convey, and when they're telling the audience directly what their messages are or anything like that. I don't want it to come across as a pretentious take in any way, because this is not my intention. I am aware that I'm an English major, and I have spent my degree kind of fine-tuning critical thinking, media literacy, analysis skills. That's all very much at the core of an English degree. But I don't think you need an English degree to be able to do this with just general media at all. And this is in no way of the fault of the audience or an individual who is consuming this type of media, because I fully am aware that I am also likely a victim of this kind of trend in media. But the trend that I'm seeing and noticing is kind of a decrease in critical thinking and media literacy, and a decrease specifically in the way that media allows its audience to engage in those skills. Again, this is not a dig at individuals at all. It's more me pointing out kind of the harm in media itself, not allowing its audiences to kind of make up their own minds about, you know, a piece of media, its messages, the intentions, not letting its audience make up its own interpretation about a text or a film, anything like that. I think that's harmful, because if we're not allowing our audiences to practice those skills, then we're gonna lose them. And I think this also can connect a little bit to, or a lot of it actually, to the rise in AI and kind of decrease in critical thinking and literacy and knowledge with our reliance on AI. It's not, obviously, AI isn't really a factor in Del Toro's Frankenstein, but I think the underlying tones and underlying issues are related in the same way. And I think they are rising together in conjunction. To speak more specifically about this point in connection to the movie and the book, I think they overplayed Frankenstein's evilness and villainy in the film, and also overplayed the creature's goodness and innocence in the film, which I think makes Del Toro's rendition of Frankenstein lose a lot of the nuance of the original text, unfortunately. For example, in the film, at the end of the film, Henry's character looks at Frankenstein directly and tells him that he is the monster, which is very, like, obviously on the nose, to the point, and leaves no room for interpretation there. But I think that they were just overstating that a little bit too much, to the point that I'm like, tone it down a little bit. I get it. We get it. Frankenstein is evil. He's the bad guy in this. A Aside from it being just painfully obvious what Del Toro is trying to convey to us in the film, I think it also just loses a lot of the original point of Mary Shelley's novel in the first place. So it loses touch with its original source material, which I don't think is great. I am the #1 hater of Victor Frankenstein. I think he's a shithead and so annoying, but I don't think he's evil in any way, and I don't think he's a villain or evil at all in the original text. There are a lot of key changes to Victor's character in the novel. Firstly, Victor's childhood is completely different in the novel versus the film. In the film, Del Toro offers us a very classic narrative of an abused kid who's neglected and doesn't receive love or isn't shown a portrait of love from his parents, which ultimately leads us down a path of showing how he becomes the person that he becomes in his adulthood and for the rest of the film, which I think is something that is a bit overplayed and is just, it lacks, again, the nuance and the depth of the original text. In the book, Victor actually has a very pleasant childhood that he looks back on very fondly and with a lot of nostalgia and longing for, almost at the beginning of the text. In the novel, Victor's parents are very loving and are considered a model for him for how he shows love and affection and how he should show love and affection and to care for others. I have a quotation from the novel that showcases this. It reads, "There is a sense of justice in my father's upright mind which rendered it necessary that he should approve highly to love strongly." There's also another quotation in the novel talking specifically about Victor's parents and their attitudes and behaviors towards him that reads, "My mother's tender caresses and my father's smile of benevolent pleasure while regarding me are my first recollections." So this very much contrasts and goes completely against how Del Toro portrays Frankenstein's childhood. You know, we get the abusive father, unloving father, he doesn't care about Frankenstein's mother in any way. And so naturally we get who Frankenstein is in adulthood and for the rest of the novel. I think the book's rendition of his childhood and that it was a good childhood and he had no reason really to become who he was adds a lot more layers to Victor's character. I think this also really makes us consider why people do what they do, because Victor knew exactly what he should have done and how he should have treated the creature, especially in the creation scene, because he was modeled this by his parents growing up, so he knew what he had to do, but he does the exact opposite of what he was brought up to do. So I feel like the novel is asking us why he would do that, and that's kind of what we're trying to uncover here. We're looking at the internal struggles and battles and anxieties that Victor deals with. Ultimately, the way he treats the creature in the creation scene does become one of the biggest mistakes and regrets of Victor's life. So we see how he kind of deals with the consequences of his own actions. I will also add, kind of as a side note, that they did change Victor's age in the film. In the book, he's supposed to be a young man in his 20s, a student. They make him just a full-grown adult in the book. The fact that Victor in the film is not a young man in his 20s or a student makes us lose the ability to attribute Victor's behavior to youthful naivety and his mistakes to youthful naivety. Instead, Victor's just a grown man acting the way he is, which is kind of just embarrassing for him. Another change that they made to Victor's character in the film compared to the book was that they made Victor too confident and cocky. A big part of the novel is seeing how Victor's anxieties and psychological distress kind of progress throughout the novel in the wake of what he has done and in creating life and bringing back the dead. In a way, the novel is just kind of detailing and showcasing the aftermath of the psychological chaos that Victor must endure as a result of his own actions. They somehow made Victor more insufferable and annoying in the film compared to the book, which I don't know how they did it, but we did it. And it almost makes me appreciate and like Victor in the book more, which is crazy. And I will say almost. We still are a hater of Victor Frankenstein. I feel like this point is really, really apparent in the creation scenes in both the book and the film, comparing the two. In the book, the creation scene is a very solitary activity. Victor does it alone in a room. He doesn't tell anyone he's doing it. He does it of his own accord. He's not commissioned by a wealthy man to do so. In the book, Victor is very much mediated by his own ambition and the obsession surrounding bringing life and creating life and unlocking the secret to life. And he also says how he deprives himself of health and sleep and rest and all of this, and he isolates himself from his family in order to complete this, which is very much not the way that it's portrayed in the films. Also, immediately after the creation of the creature, Victor regrets what he does, like almost instantly. There's a quotation that I'll read. He says that the beauty of the dream vanished and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. This is very contrasting to the film's portrayal of the aftermath of the creation scene, where Victor is very just fascinated by the creature and kind of keeps the creature captive. This is not at all what happens in the book. I think that this aspect of the film also very much lessens the impact of the theme of ambition and the dangers of ambition that the novel has and that the novel is trying to convey. Very notable and popular quote from the novel is, "Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes of town to be the world, than he who aspires to be greater than his will allow," which is very Faustian. Shout out Dr. Faustus. I also just wanted to quickly add in a little bit and comment a little bit about Del Toro's capitalist tone that he adds to the film. He adds a character who essentially commissions Victor to bring a dead body to life. Again, like, that's not what happens in the book, and it's very different. And it's less so his own ambitions and his own desires that lead him down the path to creating the creature. It's kind of another person's will that decides that. On the other side of the argument, we have the creature's character in the film. In very much the same way that Frankenstein's character was overstated as evil in the film, I think that the creature was very overstated as innocent and good in the film, which loses a lot of the nuance and the point of the original text for me. By making the creature just the epitome of good and innocence in the film, I feel like it loses Mary Shelley's theme and the point of Mary Shelley's original text regarding almost a nature versus nurture debate for me, and something that I have always really found interesting about the original text. In the original text, I argue that Mary Shelley is trying to convey that good and evil are not necessarily innate things, or that evil isn't something that's innate, but something that is very much influenced by external factors. And we see this very, very much through the character of the creature in the novel. Additionally, I feel like the text goes even further by showcasing the complexities of human nature, in which no character is characterized as good or evil, and they are all full of flaws and have their downsides to them. And this aspect of the film is just very much not there. I think Shelley's trying to convey that there are no clear villains or heroes in the novel, because that's just not reality. That's not human nature. There are no true villains or heroes in reality, so there isn't any in the text either. Del Toro does unfortunately brand Victor as the villain of the text and the creature as the victim of the text in a way, so I think it's too bland. It loses depth and the nuance of the original text a lot. I do think it's a good development to show the innocence of the creature, and Del Toro does do a good job of that, because that's often misrepresented in media a lot of the time, where the creature is just shown as an evil monster who can't really speak, is not eloquent. Okay, I got cut off there a little bit, but media often misses the point or the original text a lot, where they portray the monster as evil, or the creature as evil and as actually a monster, when that's not the case in the original text. But that being said, I don't think the film makes the creature monstrous enough. Like, yes, he's not fully a monster in any capacity, but they don't really do that at all in the film, which again misses the point of the original text. For me, the creature in Frankenstein represents the ways in which society create the monsters that they are so frightened of. In one of my classes for university, we discussed how the creature in Frankenstein is kind of encompassing competing binaries in a way. The monster, or the creature, is both a monster and not, living and not, peaceful and violent, and that's kind of where we draw that he's the other. It's the otherness of the creature that is so frightening to the others in the novel. I also think that Shelley's original text kind of engages with the very medieval ideology of the monster, because that's kind of what the medieval monster is. It's the otherness of an entity that makes it a monster. And that could be a full other thing. I took a couple medieval classes for my degree as well, and I really liked them. Something that really struck to me and really stuck with me is the medieval notion of the monster. But anyways, I digress. The creature in the text has all of the elements of what should allow him to be a functioning part of society, but it doesn't quite work, and that's what makes him monstrous and what kind of bars him from entering society in any capacity, basically. Okay, moving on a little bit. I have a bone to pick with the way Clerval is not a character in the film. They essentially merged Henry Clerval's character with Henry in the movie, who is actually Victor's brother. In the big year of 2025, we have somehow de-Yassified Frankenstein, and I think that's slightly criminal. For background context, Henry Clerval in the novel is Victor's childhood best friend, who he has a lot of affection for, and there's a lot of homosexual undertones, homoerotic undertones to it, which is very characteristic of the 19th century novel and classic works of literature in a lot of ways. To prove this to you, I'm going to read you a quotation from Frankenstein that is basically a letter written by Clerval to Frankenstein. Okay, he says, and I quote, "I'd rather be with you in your solitary rambles than with these Scotch people whom I do not know. Hasten then, my dear friend, to return, that I may again feel myself somewhat at home, which I cannot do in your absence." They're in love. You cannot tell me otherwise. When I read that for the first time, I was like, they're lovers, and that's that. I did also discuss a lot of queer theory related to Frankenstein for one of my classes, so there is a lot of really interesting takes and interpretations of Frankenstein, using the source material, of course. So if you're interested in reading up on that, there's a lot out there, so I would highly recommend it. It could be its own video, so I'm not gonna go too much into that, but I am mad that they kind of didn't include this aspect. They made Clerval's character into Victor's brother in the film, which kind of just made it so he wasn't allowed to have those homoerotic tensions and that relationship anymore, because obviously that would be incestuous. The changes that the film made to Elizabeth's character kind of irked me in a very similar way to the way that they changed Clerval's character. or kind of didn't include Clairval's character. Firstly, Elizabeth in the film is betrothed to Victor's brother, Henry, which doesn't happen. She's betrothed to and kind of engaged to Victor. Kind of, you know this throughout the entirety of the novel, almost. So that really changes the dynamic of their character and also sets it up for a really annoying and unnecessary love triangle. I am historically a hater of love triangles, so this is a bit of a personal vendetta that I have, but I just think that they're really annoying and very rarely work and are believable in any way. The only love triangle that I like and enjoyed was the love triangle between the main characters in The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. I think that's the only acceptable one for me. So it just makes a very weird love triangle between two brothers and Elizabeth, which I don't like. And I guess they were trying to make Victor's character seem more unlikable and like a villain, but I just found it to be unnecessary because he's already unlikable and he already was unlikable before this. So now they're just making him bad in every aspect, which is kind of makes it almost unbelievable for his character. They're trying to make him almost a fairy tale-like villain or a Disney-like villain that are just pure evil. That's it. Another aspect that they changed in the film about Elizabeth's character is that she didn't grow up with Victor and knowing Victor. She's introduced later in his adulthood as the fiance of his brother. So they don't have kind of a childhood growing up together and knowing each other in that way and that closeness and intimacy. So this really changes their relationship dynamic, and it also changes how we perceive Victor pursuing Elizabeth, and his kind of love and desire for her also is shifted a lot. Because Elizabeth enters Victor's life in his adulthood and she enters his life as the fiance of Victor's brother, Victor's admiration for Elizabeth comes off as very lustful and obsessive and very surface level compared to what it is in the novel. So once again, the character changes in the film kind of make us lose a lot of the nuance of the original text, unfortunately. If you couldn't tell, that's a major theme for this video. Obviously, I really shit on Del Toro's interpretation of Frankenstein. I'm not going to sugarcoat the fact that I was very disappointed by it. I hold the story very, very close to my heart, but I will offer a silver lining despite all of this in the fact that it is really great to see how classic literature and something like Frankenstein getting portrayed still in the media and interpreted and adapted still in the media. And it's really cool to see how classic works of literature have been enjoyed in the past when they were originally published, but are still enjoyed in maybe different capacities, but I feel like in a pretty similar capacity in the present. I also think this really speaks to the greatness of Mary Shelley's mind. She wrote Frankenstein at 18, I believe, as a teenager at least. And I think that that's really inspiring. She was able to write such a profound and thought-provoking novel at that age and in that time. And we still continue to mediate on her story today, so it withstood the test of time. Obviously, society has changed a lot from when Frankenstein was originally published, but I think this showcases the importance of studying history and the arts. I'm sure that, or I know for a fact that we as a society have changed a lot and probably get a lot of different things out of Frankenstein today than people did back then, because things change, people change, mindsets change, all of that for sure. But the fact is that we still enjoy something today that people did centuries ago as well. I don't know how comforting it is to people to think about how close of a connection we have to our past in that way. I think it's fairly comforting and just interesting to see. But I do think that this is a celebration of a very human aspect of life and something that's very important to consider. No matter how many times Frankenstein is adapted in the future, I will probably be consuming all of them. Anyways, that was my ramble on Frankenstein. I definitely want to hear people's thoughts in the comments if you have any. Even if you disagree with me, that's okay. I realize that I did go into this kind of as a hater, but that's okay. Frankenstein still holds such a special place in my heart and always will. And if you really liked the movie, that's great. I'm so happy for you. Obviously, like, everyone has different tastes and different things that they want to get out of things. So I don't fault you if you liked Frankenstein. I hope we can discuss it. Anyways, that is all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you liked what you saw today. And I will see you next time. Goodbye.